Every region holds tragedies buried deep in their history. Volcarona causing the collapse of an entire civilization within the desert resort, creating Yamask in the process. Giovanni never being stopped by Red and becoming the leader of Team Rainbow Rocket. The sacrifices of lore keepers in Hoenn. The class wars that continue to this day in Kalos. The burial of Paldea's lost city, and so much more. I've scoured the lost tales of every region, events covered up by the Pokemon League, and dark secrets of entire civilizations, so I can now bring to you the hidden tragedy of every Pokemon region. Howdy there, I'm Krellic, and today we're going region by region and digging into details that most people miss or just simply don't really talk about. The first of which is one you likely already know about, but we'll get into some more obscure ones in other regions. Because we're not only going to talk about the full implications of Team Rainbow Rocket, but also how it was necessary for Celebi to prevent a second Team Rainbow Rocket from forming. When we look at Rainbow Rocket, they appeared as their own event in the post-game of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Giovanni's appearance at first just seems like a resurgence, a great big bad coming back to wreak havoc on Alola, having fun. Hey, haven't seen this guy in forever, right? Let's give him a big moment. But then we start to look into it deeper. We start interacting with each and every one of the villain leaders from the past games, each one of them succeeding in their own personal conquests in separate universes. But before we get to that, I want to talk about how Giovanni reached this point. The only way we're able to find out is after defeating him and his Mega Mewtwo. He then talks about how the battle reminds him of something from long ago, making him feel nostalgic. This is Giovanni referencing when the legendary trainer Red faced him in the climax of the original games, likely after the Silphco incident, because it is when we battle him in his gym that he admits he plans to resurrect Team Rocket, but he agrees to abandon these plans after we defeat him. Unfortunately, in the universe that Rainbow Rocket Giovanni comes from, this is the exact moment in which Red would have failed. The pinnacle moment in which Giovanni stands at the top, not only as the 8th gym leader, but as the man who would then take over Kanto, Johto, the world, and then aim for the multiverse. We ask how, but clearly it's through the help of Mewtwo, a creature the manga loves to say is stronger than anything found in nature, and I'll be honest, kind of love that saying too. It's a pretty baller line. But nevertheless, from here, Giovanni would become a terror to multiple realities. It's not a matter of how at this point, but just a matter of when. Because with the technology of Silphco and his own scientists back in the palm of his hands, he would continue adding to his power by traveling throughout the world. He would witness leaders from other evil organizations fail, make note of their exploits, and find the universes in which they win on their own without his help. Because why would he waste his time with anyone not good enough to stand on their own and succeed? He wants the best, not someone to hold the hand of. But unfortunately, even when these evil leaders succeed, these antagonists succeed, even when the best of the villains reach their goal, everything falls apart into nothing as tragedy strikes, and it strikes really hard. Starting with Archie, he states how when he had just completed his great plan, he was swallowed up by a huge wave, and then he was suddenly in this world when he came around. A perfect visual we find of this is through Pokemon Generations, Episode 8, The Cavern, where the Alpha Sapphire version of Archie succeeds in restoring origin form Kyogre, only to watch as he was attacked in turn by it directly. Yeah, it wasn't a wave swallowing him up whole, it was a giant whale instead, but I think you get the idea. In turn, Maxie completed his mission only to be swallowed up by a fissure and be teleported to this world as well. Once again, even in his alternate universe version of Omega Ruby, Maxie's success is envisioned to be catastrophic in turn, as Groudon bisects the islands that he is on, assuredly killing our antagonist. This pattern continues with Lysander, who had fired the ultimate weapon with the intent of killing everyone except Team Flare, he states, only for a light to swallow him up anyway. Cyrus creating what he believed was his new world, only to be swallowed up by a shadow. And then lastly, there's Ghetsis. Now Ghetsis doesn't really state what happened to him, but he has Reshiram on his team in Ultra Moon, or Zekrom if you play Ultra Sun, but he was never the person to attain the dragon. And was, the main character was, meaning that knowing how these dragons function, he must have attained only one of the dragons, and in his attempt to take the other one away from N in the first Black and White games, he failed, only for him to be attacked by N and the opposite dragon. And just before his demise, he is whisked away to be part of Rainbow Rocket. This means that all of these leaders are about as close to succeeding as possible, but due to the power of legendary Pokemon beyond their comprehension, they failed. But if Giovanni and Rainbow Rocket can give them the right tools, bring them in as effectively admins of their own, then they can succeed throughout the multiverse, which would further explain why each leader does have their version's legendary Pokemon. They are given the power to conquer. And I would love to imagine, actually no I wouldn't because it'd be terrible, a universe in which Giovanni did walk with them and conquer each of these other universes, but they know that they haven't returned back to those lands yet. Now, the major issue with all of this is that there is one Pokemon floating throughout the timeline that serves to correct anomalies and protect the planet in its own way, and that Pokemon is Celebi. The major outright evidence of this is when we are brought to the past by Celebi in Heart Gold Soul Silver to face Giovanni one last time. A version of Giovanni that hears the call of his second-in-command, Archer, and the rest of Team Rocket calling out to him over the Goldenrod radio tower to come back, to bring Team Rocket back to its full glory and take over Johto and Kanto. Yet, here we are, to stop him as we defeat him before he can return, making him give up once and for all the idea of returning to Team Rocket. But why? Why is this such a big deal? Why do we have to do it in this moment? Of course, he was more than just a menace. Even other versions of Giovanni are colossal in terms of potential, and since we're talking multiversal, I may as well bring up other versions of him that we are aware of. In the anime, he heads the long-standing Team Rocket, who gets involved with so much, even if we see a lot of lovable incompetence from our primary trio. In the manga, we see instance after instance of Giovanni being an incredible trainer as he comes back again and again as a major threat, even being able to take over half of Kanto underneath their noses while inducting Koga, Sabrina, Lieutenant Surge, and Blaine into his original evil team. We may not know what Rainbow Rocket Giovanni did in his great full plan, but we can get a grand idea through these mediums. And since he's multiversal, he became an anomaly in the time-space continuum, getting the attention of Celebi. Unfortunately, tracking him down, getting other trainers to confront him, and even succeeding was something that would be incredibly difficult. As such, stopping Rainbow Rocket was kind of left to chance. But when another Giovanni is on the verge of returning to Team Rocket and has the potential of becoming a second Rainbow Rocket leader, it seems like this is where Celebi was able to step in before it was too late. While we often think of Pokemon as a children's franchise, as I've grown up over the years, I see villains who did have far more strength and depth and real stakes associated with their success, especially as we continue to get new additions to the franchise. Now, I would talk about one other theory that fits inside of this one regarding Rainbow Rocket, which actually involves this Giovanni and his rise causing the death of Green, but for that, you'd have to check out my video on Alola's first faller. For now, we can move on to another more surface level but not talked about enough tragedy within the Johto region. This may sound strange, but the original Lake of Rage event, not the one we get to see in Generation 2 games that we experience, the original one was an inside job. Let's begin with quotes from Commander Kamado in the Daybreak cutscene of Legends Arceus. He states the specific sentence of, when explaining our plan to move to Hisui, while Benny states in another moment, Kamado and I saw our hometown burned to the ground by maddened Pokemon running amok. We lost plenty of friends and comrades that day. To help drive this home in terms of our base details, in the Japanese version of Pokemon Legends Arceus, when Kamado loses his composure, he speaks in the Kansai dialect. The Kansai region, which that dialect comes from, is the part of Japan which Johto is based on. And finally, in the Italian version, Kamado mentions the Whirl Islands and Mount Silver by name. Further than this, we do get that left field twist of Benny just straight up being a ninja, and there's only one place we can tie raging Pokemon that destroy everything and a ninja together, where they could have effectively been close enough allies and neighbors to have grown up in a village that got destroyed by the same Pokemon, especially when we take all the other details of him knowing these other locations in Johto, and that would be Mahogany Town, home of the ninja as it likes to claim. Though if you did want one last tie, Mahogany Town's gym leader is Price, with the standout Gen 2 Pokemon on Benny's team being what might be a Sneasler in Hisui would have been a Sneasel, the only Ice type on his team representing the Ice type gym leader, even though he didn't have a Sneasel on his team. The town itself is incredibly small as well, so very small, even for Kanto and Johto, which seems to have a number of small settlements. It's so small that it doesn't even have a Pokemart, instead having a place that is eventually turned into a traditional medicine shop with bitter herbs. The story of the lake itself goes as follows. It is said that the Lake of Rage was created the last time many Gyarados got together and stirred up a storm. The crater that remained filled with rainwater and became the Lake of Rage. This lake will rise in water during the event, but then lower when it is no longer raining, allowing access to the other side where a singular house lies. And while what I'm about to say might be a bit of a coincidence, we can meet Wesley, who gives us a souvenir of the Black Belt, something we can associate with Kamado and his martial arts, as he was more than just a samurai. If we get rid of this coincidence, it only changes one detail, which is the location of where this old village once stood. Would it have been in what is now a crater filled with water, or would it be in what is now the rebuilt village of Mahogany Town? This isn't a detail we may ever find the real answer to, admittedly. Despite this, as we look at all the details, we find that this singular tragedy created a domino effect throughout time. Kamado and Benny moving to Hisui, keeping Diamond and Pearl clans from fighting until our arrival. Silene being a major ally to him, his right hand, who would then pass information down throughout the generations, which would allow Cyrus to gain the info he needed to try and create a world without spirit. Meanwhile, Kamado would stay in the renamed Hisui, now called Sinnoh, as his descendant Rowan would be a professor and mentor to two champions of the region, Cynthia and the protagonist of Diamond and Pearl. Benny eventually moved away to Hoenn, as he claims he wants to be somewhere with a more agreeable climate, eventually leading to Wally being born. And the list can go on and on from there if we really wanted to look at every single life that was affected thanks to the events that transpired after Kamado and Benny moved to Hisui. The real horror is this short bit of story we have regarding that Lake of Rage, the old home of an entire village of people completely gone now. Lives were ended when this initial event happened. On knee-jerk response, you might expect this sort of thing to transform humans into unfeeling monsters that hate Pokemon. Instead, this only results in Kamado being more protective of his people and Benny working from the shadows, both of them being some of our final fights before the very end of Legends Arceus. The question I have to answer is, was this really just the act of some very aggressive and angry Gyarados, or was it that inside job that I claim? I get it. Sometimes Pokemon do things out of the blue for no reason, but something consistent in the franchise, from the manga to the games and even the anime, is that there's usually a really good reason why Pokemon are acting en masse to cause great destruction. Sometimes there's a folktale told about how someone sealed them away in your grandma's cookie tin. Sometimes humans build in natural land and take away homes from Pokemon, which cause Tentacruel to go nuts. Or even simply people just disturb the Pokemon in their time of rest. But here, we get nothing. No info on how this whole event could have been triggered. Obviously, they're still keeping things vague just in case they don't want to use Gyarados, or in case they want to have us experience it ourselves in a future Legends game perhaps. But seeing that Team Rocket conducted their experiments here, there has to be a greater tie waiting to be made. Choosing what is effectively the smallest village with no police force to force Pokemon to evolve. Even as I look into the manga, we get no real additional information. Just a mass outbreak of Gyarados with the famed Red Gyarados emerging later in the fight. If we have fun and get into some heavy speculation, then there's always a chance that this is just the present times repeating the past. And all those years ago, there was another way to force a Pokemon to evolve. Rare candies, for example, have existed for a very long time. And while I don't think someone just dumped a whole vat of concentrated high fructose syrup rare candy edition into the lake, something along those lines may have caused it, as ridiculous as it might sound. It would be a way that someone purposefully did it, causing the Gyarados to go on this rampage without the individual losing their life, or maybe they did. I'm making it clear here and now, though, that I'm starting to believe that the original Lake of Rage event was no mistake, that someone intentionally bothered the Gyarados, causing them to rampage, and it's in this rampage that they attacked the village nearby, destroying it and causing the residents to abandon their homes. We won't know if this was just them causing damage, looking for something hidden in the village related to Ho-Oh, Lugia, or the 3 legendary beasts, or for some other reason entirely until we see the games explore it at this point. It is just one massive mystery, but this old event is a cover-up that is hardly spoken of, and we should keep our eyes out for more info as we move on. Now we're on to something that most people won't know about unless you read the manga, which has been bleeding into the games more and more these days in terms of lore. I'm not saying everything in the manga is canon, but there are some things that line up perfectly, and other things being used by the games as they come out, such as a lot of what we see in Legends and ZA. I'm only specifying all that here because there's always one dork that likes to give me the, actually, don't ever mix the manga, anime, and the games together, it makes no sense. Get media literacy, and realize that they all still get approved by the same company. You're just as bad as the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom who can't read. Also, I'm trying to have fun. Anywho, the fate of the lore keepers is something that seems to be a consistent tragedy. While in the games, we only learn of lore keeper Zydia and how she took up the mantle after a past lore keeper, even in the games, we learn the following through her partner Pokemon, a Whisperer named Aster. This Whisperer usually accompanies Zydia while she's not in disguise. Zydia occasionally addresses her like a daughter, and Aster occasionally makes cries of "mum" to Zydia. Aster seems to have been named after someone close to Zydia who has passed away. According to an interview with Shigeru Omori in the June 2015 issue of Nintendo Dream, Aster was a Draconid woman with special powers who held the position of lore keeper before Zydia. In the Delta episode, this Aster is first mentioned at the beginning of the Delta episode by Zydia, who swears to Aster that she will protect the world from an incoming meteoroid. Near the end of the Delta episode, Zydia reveals to the player that she and Aster used to be together all the time before the latter was lost. This gets expanded on in the manga, Aster being described as having special powers and had also befriended Rayquaza, the legendary Pokemon revered by the Draconids. It was the only known member of the clan to have permission to ride on top of it. When the Devon Corporation came to the embedded tower in hopes of capturing Rayquaza so that the Pokemon Association could study it, Aster fought alongside Rayquaza in order to stop them. Though we don't get to see that battle go on, Rayquaza was successfully captured and taken away along with several keystones that Aster had collected. When Zydia arrived at the tower, she found the area in flames, and that Aster had died during the battle. Traumatized by Aster's death, Zydia began to cry so much that her voice eventually gave out. She also took a partially burnt cloak belonging to Aster as a memento. With Aster dead, the title of Lore Keeper was passed down to Zydia. Despite this, some Draconids were opposed to her becoming the next Lore Keeper, as she was not as strong as Aster and did not possess the abilities needed to stop the meteoroid that was foreseen to crash into the planet. When we look at the story as a whole, it fits incredibly well. I'd say it's comparable to mythical Pokemon in that the only way to get some really in-depth information on those mythicals is by watching the movies, same as how we get all this information on Aster and Zydia only through the manga, and it still fits. I will admit though, for the movies, it gets a little bit unreliable for some Pokemon when the movies stray a bit far from other consistent lore, but that's when we try to pull relevant, consistent info out and really dig for that good lore, you know? Now, this is only part of a greater tragedy, Aster dying to the hands of the Devon Corporation and being covered up only for the corporation to continue their shadowy methods is terrible. But I want to instead focus on what would have happened even if Aster, or maybe even Zydia rather, had ridden on Rayquaza. Unless Aster's special powers prevented this, she would have been guaranteed to die while riding this great serpent of the atmosphere. Because as we find out, Rayquaza releases ozone, a very important key component to our ozone layer and atmosphere overall, but incredibly deadly to you, me, and anything else that breathes. If the extreme amount doesn't kill you by effective poisoning, then you're definitely damaging your body and causing long-term damage. In other words, every single lore keeper who has ever existed and is meant to ride Rayquaza in times of crisis are destined to die a premature death. This could even potentially expand into the story that Ansha tells in Legend ZA of the legendary trio, and even though she says nothing about the child with stars on his cape, if that truly was a human, then that may have been one of the first lore keepers. And I hear you, you're asking me, well, if it wasn't a human, then who could it have been, Krillic? Well, history in Pokemon gets very muddled, just like the history we have in the real world. And in some cases, we question if humans were ever fully involved in some conflicts. We'll take a small tangent to drive this point home, because for example, tapestries of Galar were hidden away by the monarchy, which would reveal the truth about there being not one, but two heroes and two legendary dogs. But even then, those heroes may have never been human. They may have just been two human-like figures, which were Calyrex and Urshifu, as evidenced by their titles of the Fairy King and Martial Arts Master, the individuals that Zacian and Zamazenta served in their own time as per their Pokédex entries. With that parallel out of the way and back to the lore keepers, we likely have generations of people who saved the world time and time again who met an early demise. And if that human isn't human, then there's only one other creature within all of Pokemon that would fit that description, a child of the stars being Jirachi. But that's neither here nor there and might require its own entire video. And while Rayquaza is a bit of a jackass doing so, it not responding to Zinnia or even attacking Zinnia in defiance of her trying to gain partnership may be more than just telling her she's not worthy. It could be Rayquaza protecting her. He could have been a lot nicer than this, though, I will admit. You do not need to gut punch a teenager with the entirety of your 455.3 pound body. That's just inexcusable. This, though, was the end of a multi-generational sacrifice, something that was originally necessary, but in the modern age of spacesuits, no, it's no longer a need. People do not need to be sacrificed. Virgins do not need to be thrown into volcanoes. We don't need to lead a lamb to the slaughter. We have technology. And the Lord Rayquaza has adapted to the new times with his New Testament. Thou shalt not sacrifice children to space for the greater good of man. We have kick-ass spacesuits. I'm ready to move on. There's nothing more to say here. Here's a big classic in the form of the Old Chateau, something that almost got its own video. While you may have heard plenty of stories on it before, and I may have covered some of those theories, allow me to make a personal crack at this one. We're going to use Pokemon Generations once again, a series that does like to stay pretty one-to-one with the games as we follow Cheryl and Chansey into the Old Chateau, betting a place to rest for the night. This whole story is creepy and I love it, so allow me to kind of slow down and get into the mood here, with them meeting what seems to be an old and kindly butler that invites them to spend the night. They accept with kindness, but we already have a massive issue beyond the eyes of the painting moving to follow them. This painting is the greeting face of this mansion, something you'd expect to see only for the head of the household, of which a butler absolutely is not. We sit with them, a delicious spread of food before us, and while Cheryl and Chansey excitedly thank him for the feast, they eat from empty plates, clearly enjoying themselves on the fine dining of air itself, an illusion holding control over them as the butler laughs to himself. It is actually a little hilarious, though, to think that Chansey is actually satisfied as it burps, which only irritates the butler imposter in some way, bad manners and all that. He invites them to their room for the night, following through the hallways, but despite the wandering that only leads them in circles, they eventually turn the corner to find themselves alone, only to see him reappear behind them, nonchalantly inviting them further as he then melts into the ground as a poisonous puddle. His laughter marks his entry as a poisonous, monstrous, massive cloud that transforms into a haunter that bites down upon them, allowing them to then wake up after their fainting and the true version of the mansion, dilapidated, falling apart, and a singular note now floating down to them. The note states, something so peculiar should make off with the motor. And she stops to see a ghost girl carrying a baneri, lamenting over her reading that note, then attacking them because they read it. The episode then ends. Now we investigate further, my dear viewer, because when we look at the games within Platinum, we get this exact note. Something that is meant to say, as I accidentally said the whole thing, something so peculiar should make off with the motor. And this is in relation to Rotom, of course, the key Pokemon of this location. Other Pokemon we find here are Ghastly and Haunter, and if you slot in any Generation 3 game to the bottom of your DS, then you'll also have the chance of encountering Gengar, my boy, making them keen protectors of this place that are able to shapeshift. This means they are protecting Rotom from something. Humans, in this case, as we would know from its absence from anywhere but that singular TV. This would explain why it's the head of the household acting as a butler, either Ghastly or Haunter in this case, because these Pokemon simply don't understand what the roles of the mansion are, nor do they matter. Anyone lost in the deep woods of Eterna will ignore the final details if they're desperate or foolish enough. And if not, they're Pokemon, and there's enough of them to drive wicked humans out with their abilities. But now we have to ask ourselves, why is this the scenario we find ourselves in? Well, we have to move to the Team Galactic Eterna building for more details, finding a mysterious notebook in the Rotom room, a room that is existent across Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Brilliant Diamond, and Shining Pearl, a book that gives us consistent details throughout the years. It was by pure chance that I obtained information about the Pokemon Rotom. Remarkably, Rotom is able to merge with special motors. Rotom can thereby enter various home appliances and change its form. I've confirmed that Rotom changes its types and the moves it can learn by reflecting the characteristics of any home appliance it enters. This Pokemon requires exhaustive observation and analysis. To ensure I get all the credit, my Rotom research must be kept secret. They will come to recognize me as the scientific genius, Chair. And while the last word is cut off, we know it is in relation to Charon, otherwise known as Pluto, scientist of Team Galactic. This story only falls deeper as we read from an old notebook, one that would allow us to tie this whole thing back to originating with Cyrus himself. Our encounter was a sudden one. It was when I found my toy robot, one that I had earlier misplaced. At that instant, a Pokemon startlingly emerged from the lawnmower's motor. Clutching my robot, I stared, transfixed by the peculiar Pokemon. The Pokemon hovered in the air, held aloft by a power unseen. As if curious and unafraid of my presence, it floated towards me. Crackling sounds accompanied it, as if from static electricity in the air. Remarkably, it seems the Pokemon was the source of this power. In alarm, I flinched, certain that my face would be subjected to a shock. Much to my surprise, the Pokemon seemed to favor me with a smile. Finally, I came to realize that the Pokemon only wished to be friends. I've decided to name this most wondrous Pokemon Rotom. Simple though it may be, Rotom emerged to me from the motor of a lawnmower. Motor and Rotom. Surely the link is obvious. Rotom is a Pokemon that is simply sensational. The fact that it can turn invisible is simply the beginning. What makes Rotom unique is its ability to enter and operate machinery. Rotom and I became fast friends. We were perpetual companions. The electricity from its body forbade contact, however. We could not touch, let alone hug or hold hands. But we cared not, for we were bonded on a much deeper and corporeal level. A feeling of mischief got the better of me one day. Seeing Rotom hovering, I decided to startle it. Normally, I would not. Perhaps frightened, Rotom discharged power beyond its usual range. I fell stunned into the arms of unconsciousness. When I came to my horror, I realized that Rotom had disappeared. I searched high and low for my friend in dismay and desperation. Don't chastise yourself. The fault is mine. No harm done. Let us play as we always have. Though my words poured out, my friend could not be found to hear them. My search for Rotom carried me far from home. It was in the town's rubbish heap that I again found my old toy robot. Curiously, our eyes met. Then the robot waved a hand as if in greeting. I knew then that I had found my lost friend. I ran to and hugged Rotom tight, talking on and on.
The robot's eyes lit up happily as I held it. I'm certain that within it, Rotom was emitting lots of electricity. Somehow, I felt I could understand Rotom's thoughts better than before. Also, I realized that we would remain friends throughout our lives. The way that that is written is very similar to the statistical, almost cold and factual way that Cyrus speaks, which is very unique within the franchise in ways that very few other characters, let alone villains, actually do. Even as we look at Cyrus in Rainbow Rocket, after the battle he actually tells Rotom that he will not do anything to it, noting before the battle indirectly in surprise that even the Pokédex is controlled by it nowadays. If you can even really call it a surprise, the man's face is the most stoic of all in the entirety of the franchise, but seriously, even when we defeat him in the original games, he just looks us dead in the eyes and says, "No, I'm still doing what I want. Fuck your Pokemon battle. I'm a real adult." This is a connection of emotion, something he lacks otherwise. He even questions how are we able to connect so strongly with our Pokemon in this Rainbow Rocket fight, and how is that turned into a legitimate power and strength? Not just wishy-washy garbage that people say, but rather true energy. One last detail is that in the manga, Rotom does travel from the Old Chateau to the Rotom Room within the Team Galactic Eternum building, the room itself being marked as a secret room, which still lines up with the games. But there's one last detail. Where was Cyrus born? Well, as it turns out, there's an old lady that lets us know that Cyrus was born in Sunny Shore City, being a good but asocial student who preferred the company of machines over Pokemon and humans. He would, ironically, be born in the sunniest place in Sinnoh, in a place that would have amazing technology, and would even become friends with Rotom, the motor Pokemon, the perfect niche Pokemon of the time to fit his asocial behavior, something that at least seemingly is more machine than Pokemon. With this knowledge, it really wouldn't matter where and when he would have met Rotom, the ending is all the same. Cyrus would continue to grow detached from people and Pokemon, seeing the one moment in which he tried to play a trick on his only friend as a moment that only caused pain. Someone he couldn't even hold, someone he couldn't even hug. It seems childish, but it would still be a minor trauma that would discourage him from doing it again, even though his friend came back. He would continue to see this Pokemon as important to him, but not for emotional reasons, but rather for his goal as he grew up, to rid the world of the human soul. After all, you can still be friends and allies with Pokemon without the soul, the driver of willpower and emotion. You just run on intelligence, the gift of Uxie. In some eyes, you'd be viewed as more robotic, but you'd, at least in his idea, make the right decisions in a world where morality is non-existent. You'd make a better universe, as he would call it. Unfortunately, Rotom could see the problem with this and left Cyrus once more to reside within an abandoned manor within the forest, the Old Chateau. Now we can make an argument that maybe Cyrus once lived here and abandoned it, but I kinda doubt this. Otherwise, we'd see Rotom captured and forced back into the Galactic Hideout or any other location. Instead, it freely lives in the chateau, protected by other Pokemon. Except, here's another kicker for you. We do see Rotom in that short. That little girl who takes on a very terrifying, movie-esque ghost persona is a little too on the nose, a little too overdramatic, appearing as she floats in the air, saying it's a shame Cheryl read the note, transforming for shock value. This and everything else in the manor is just one massive prank, spurred on by the one and only blue glowing Rotom who gained the trickster trait in an attempt to hopefully one day encourage Cyrus to be playful and joyful again, that everything is okay. Yet, Cyrus never arrived, and so he was never changed in that moment. In other words, more than just protection, all the ghosts here are having their fun, as they are often depicted to do. The long-standing tragedy in this case is very small and personal, one that didn't necessarily transform Cyrus, but only encouraged his thoughts and behavior through selection or agenda-setting bias, for lack of a better term. And now, as the version we meet with in Rainbow Rocket reunites with a version of Rotom, a kindred spirit, he sees the error of his ways, at least in this one moment, and says that he will not do anything to this world, something that works in antithesis to the Cyrus that we originally met, the one who was prepared to continue even after losing a Pokemon match. But never did he not care about Pokemon, no matter what Cyrus we've been introduced to. He just simply couldn't turn positive emotion into power. How we know this is through our final detail of this story, the Crobat he had on his team, a Pokemon that can only come to be through strong friendship. But before we continue, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this, let me know your favorite story from Pokemon, big or small. For example, I have a great love for Arven's story in Scarlet and Violet. It's done just right in a way that not only made me like a character I disliked at first, but also it hits a soft spot for me. But what comes next is my favorite hidden tragedy in all of Pokemon. I also want to say thank you to members for supporting the channel. It makes a massive difference as it lets me focus on even higher quality stories, research, and videos overall. And if you want behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month. Liking, sharing, and hyping the video are also simple but effective ways to help the channel grow in ways that help appease the mighty algorithm. But enough of all that, thank you once again, and on with the video. Now that we're in Unova, we have my favorite tragedy in all of Pokemon. How the Volcarona at Desert Resort created Yamask and betrayed its people. And this one is truly undeniable, as absurd as it may sound at first. Some long-term fans of the channel have likely heard this one before, but here we go. Volcarona betrayed humanity in its greatest moments of need, and it resulted in the creation of Yamask, a soul cursed to wander the earth as they carry the mask of their fallen body. Look wherever you want throughout the world of Pokemon, and know that you literally cannot catch a regular Yamask in the wild anywhere, except for in the Relic Castle within Unova. But how did this happen? What sort of tragedy occurred, and why did Volcarona do this? Well, it all begins with the history of Unova, the war between Zekrom and Reshiram that destroyed the world itself. Although, of course, you and I understand that they didn't literally destroy the world, but rather they only destroyed what people thought was the world. You see, their battles would have occurred many years ago when Unova was centralized around a kingdom, and many kingdoms saw themselves as the center of the world, if not the only place where all life existed. And can you blame them? They literally had the original dragon, which was effectively a god in its own right, that split into two separate, incredibly powerful Pokemon that represent truths and ideals. When this war did happen, the flames of Reshiram and the lightning of Zekrom would cause great devastation throughout the lands. More specifically, they completely destroyed the lands around the Relic Castle, a place that used to be a true resort, a place of happiness and rest that keeps its name but no longer serves that purpose. To explain better, when we look at the greater area around Relic Castle, we have the Desert Resort. The description of the location even says itself that it's a popular place for tourists, but it's too harsh to be a resort. Then we go deep into this area and find ourselves at Relic Castle, otherwise directly translated as Ancient Castle. And there's a very important story here. It is noted to be an ancient city that is over 2,500 years old. It was built by one of the ancient kings of Unova and his legendary dragon. This ancient castle is said to have been the heart of a civilization for people and Pokemon in the region. But as time went by, the city was buried in the sand of the Desert Resort. And there are a number of living relics that help us tell the story of how this castle came to ruin. The people of Unova built this castle and thrived in and around it before then. As the dragons destroyed the land, the area all around would become dangerous. No longer would there be plant roots to hold the soil from being blown away, turning more and more from dirt into nothing more than sand eroded by the elements. Wind would push away their once fertile soil. The sun would be blotted from the sky from the sandstorms and ashes that would follow, and this would cause people to lose their sun, the light that grants them warmth and the ability to farm. A prosperous land would start to fall to ruin. The Darmanitan would enter their Zen mode, living for over 1,000 years through this process without any need for food or water. It's all that they could do in order to survive in a land where there was nothing to satiate their hunger and thirst. Their stone bodies would be resistant to the elements as they witnessed everything that would follow the initial event. The people of the castle would close their doors, trying to keep the sand out, and even the destructive forces, but time wasn't on their side. They may be able to find water, but they would lose food and warmth more and more over time. Their saving grace was a Pokemon by the name of Volcarona, their sun god. Volcarona is known to have been worshipped in Unova, but strangely enough, they do not naturally occur within Unova. The only time we see them or a Larvesta is through a gift or by seeing the Volcarona in this castle. Volcarona itself would provide warmth. It would give them everything they needed in life. It would be the sun that they lost, and this is what would build up the people's worship of this creature. But the problem is that Volcarona's shed scales burn up all the oxygen in a room. Scales that are constantly shed so that people could continue to be warm, so they could find ways to survive in this now desolate land. And with enough time, the doors are closed long enough. The castle is buried in sand. The lower floors are only accessible now by falling into the sinkholes that we find inside. The people of Relic Castle were effectively trapped. All of the oxygen begins to burn up into nothingness. The people of Relic Castle would die tragic deaths and be reborn as Yamask. As a reminder, the Unovan Yamask only naturally occurs here and nowhere else in any other region whatsoever. This is where they are all born. This is why they cry when looking at their mask. This is why they try to wander the earth to find someone who will recognize their mask that was once their face. They are a tragic group of people lost and brought back as Pokemon. They are the tragedy of Relic Castle, forced to live a cursed life where nobody knows their name. And I cannot get enough of this. It's one of Pokemon's greatest hidden stories that we will never get more information on. It's entirely context clues with key points, a story that could work in any franchise, and I think that's what makes it so special, especially knowing that this will fall to the annals of history without observing it closely like this. Our next tragedy exists on a much larger scale, and some might argue it's not a tragedy, but we have the thousands of years of class wars that have occurred throughout Kalos. These class wars continuing to exist in the modern day, as made apparent by Legends ZA. Class wars, long story short, are the wars, physical or not, between the different classes of society, most often depicted as the rich versus the poor. It's the evergrande battle of the giant versus the common people, industrialization against natural world, the 1% and the common person, often hidden through phrases like low-skilled jobs or creating anti-homelessness benches, and by God, Pokemon may not address it at any point in any side mission even, but we still have those damn anti-homelessness benches in this city, which bothers me to no end. But rather than starting at the modern day, let's back it up a bit. Don't worry, I'm not going to recount the entire tale of AZ to you, but we are starting with why the war 3,000 years ago began. And it is clearly stated that it's because other regions were jealous and greedy, desiring the advancements that Kalos had, their prosperity, the richness of their people. Though they were rich in more than money, they were intelligently rich, greatly advanced individuals thanks to the genius that is AZ. Unfortunately, through the wars that would follow, AZ's Floette would be robbed from him, jump-starting the beginning of the end for the Kalosian War. They could take everything. They could war for years, but when they took Floette and returned her in a literal coffin, adorned with the rare flower gifted by AZ's mother to this Floette many years ago, it caused AZ to snap. As the books on the blue shelves within Lysander's lab states, full of sorrow, AZ built the ultimate weapon. When he did this, he left the following words: "What's wrong with bringing something you love back into this world? Without my beloved Pokemon, no other Pokemon have any meaning." And so AZ would end the war with a devastating power that would only later be buried by his brother, a brother who was originally greedy and then would see the error of his ways, only to pass this tale through the generations. This story goes on, leading us to Lysander, descendant of AZ's brother. The mountains will never know one another, but people can encounter other people, and people and Pokemon mix together. Over the ages, people and Pokemon worked alongside one another and created many things. As a result of this, a leader appeared among the humans. That leader sought to produce even more goods. Increased production of goods created a gap between haves and have-nots. This family would become rich They would adorn themselves lavishly despite their acclaimed stance against the class wars and wars fueled by greed. They were truly hypocrites as far as we are aware. The Parfum Palace originally belonged to this family of nobles, yet Lysander separated himself from it. Lysander, before we ever met him, truly did want more for the world. He helped Corbeau in his time of need and would use his wealth to give in what may be described as access to the world and its people. But to his frustration, no matter what he gave, gaps continued to be born between those that have and those that have not. Even some of those who did have the means to live comfortable lives would in turn become antagonists of the future, using their gains to then take from all those that were around them. We aren't talking about Giovanni or Cyrus, we're talking about other rich families, entire companies that sell goods while making waste of the natural beauty of the world. And of course, this would only in turn create destitution. Now, I am going to speak from experience as I relate to this subject a lot. I literally grew up from the age of like 16 to 22 with mice scurrying in my walls. But when you live in poverty, you are more willing to do things you absolutely shouldn't, or you just don't realize what you're doing is a trauma that is affecting your psyche and everything you do from here on in. I was at least blessed enough that despite my circumstances, I had a family who came together to keep things relatively safe and manageable, and I put myself to work and I was able to do a lot. But in the lives of others, they are not even half as lucky, giving us the perfect case of Emma. Emma, while taken in by Looker after years of homelessness, would still serve as a much brighter side of what poverty looks like in our stories. For in her fear of being a burden on Looker after she was taken in, she would take up a job that would land her in the hands of Xerosic, placing her in the expansion suit that would give her powers equatable to Pokemon, but would keep her in a mindless trance to commit crime. Yet another example of those in power taking advantage of those with nothing, taking what little autonomy they have left. Fortunately, Looker would rescue Emma, and she would put in amazing effort to learn to read and take up the mantle of becoming Lumio City's detective, taking over the Looker Bureau and even his mannerisms in the process. But there's something else here, because even Xerosic is still honored within the Bureau, something that I would like to talk about in a different video through Pokemon's political opinion on criminal reform. Though instead here I want to continue into ZA and how the class war has effectively changed to be more subtle but all the more dangerous. Because while anyone can participate in the ZA Royale, we do have two major top tier trainers that have incredible sway over the goings on of the city. The leader of the Rust Syndicate, Corbeau, and the leader of the Society of Battle Connoisseurs, Jacinth. Corbeau represents the individual brought up from poverty, while Jacinth represents an individual of old money as an upper class elite. Despite their circumstances, both have turned into powerhouse elites of the city with legacies driven by those before them. Once again, Corbeau being brought up by not only Lysander, but also Giovanni, while Jacinth was personally trained by former champion Diantha. They both vie for control in their own ways, taking it by force if necessary, with Corbeau extorting Vinny in a Mega Dimension side mission or acting underhanded while helping the city. After all, you can't rule a city that doesn't exist, and to make it truly yours, you should rule over it by making it better, but still striking fear in the minds and hearts of those that would doubt you or oppose you. Take care of the children, help the city's people, and strike down any opposition as necessary. Jacinth, on the other hand, is a bit more direct, taking former punks like Liban, and through humiliating defeat, transforming them into her own perfect picture of what should exist in society. In this case, a maid. But, it's not all bad. It seems like Liban enjoys her position in life and does well with the structure given all the context clues. Though Jacinth would continue to use holotech created originally by Lysander for her own wants and desires, activating her very own Jacinth zones wherever she would like. Yet despite her being so heavy-handed and wanting to gather elite trainers for battle, she never really uses her powers for outright nefarious means. She's Seelie Fae, not Unseelie Fae. These two, Corbeau and Jacinth, they despise each other despite being two sides of the same exact coin in their adult lives. These two are genuinely like that old picture of the sisters where, where one is dressed in the void of space while the other one is like dipped her hair in like a bucket of rainbows. Yet despite it all, it is in their powerful states that they can perpetuate this cycle of the class war, and in some ways, their followers do continue to do this whether they wish for it or not, and they make some changes so as to not incite that war. As we turn back to Lysander, it was through seeing that those who were given prosperity would only become greedy and take more and more that he finally snapped and became the Lysander that we met. A Lysander that would transform from the man who had given too much into a man prepared to take it all. And if he had succeeded, even if he had targeted everyone except for Team Flare, it would have been the end of the human race. To explain better, in short, a minimum viable population for maintaining genetic diversity typically follows the 50-500 rule. At least 50 individuals are required to prevent immediate inbreeding depression, while 500 to 1,000 or more are needed to maintain long-term genetic diversity and prevent harmful genetic drift. Without those numbers, the human race would face extinction, something that Lysander likely knew deep down inside. Though his plan was also to make the last surviving people immortal, so then we get into some real crazy stuff. And then, of course, according to his Rainbow Rock itself, his plan didn't matter, and everyone was going to die anyway because he couldn't actually control who the beams shot. Ultimately, the class war is the ultimate tragedy of Kalos, which will continue to grant stories of pain and oppression for years to come unless someone makes a difference. The sign of a new future being the destruction of Prism Tower and the way that everyone came together in that story. Prism Tower being a place that, at least for now, belonging to those with no money and no stake in property itself, belonging now to the creatures of nature known as Pokemon. I mean, seriously, there's like a shit ton of alpha Pokemon under that thing. I'm not f***ing with that. Now that we're in Alola, I'm going to give you a peek behind the curtain. There were 3 topics I was struggling to choose between. One was Alola's first faller, but that already has an entire hour-long dedicated video for the deep investigation of that. The second choice was the War of Alola that the Tapus fought in as they saved the islands, but that choice is now getting adapted into a nice little collaboration video with someone else. So, instead, we're going to talk about option 3, the original fall of Po Town, the place where Team Skull resides, and then dig into the formation of Team Skull and where they originally came from and their tragedy. This dilapidated little town is home to my favorite group of ne'er-do-wells within the entire franchise. As revealed by some of their members, Team Skull is composed of misfits who failed the island challenge. They steal Pokemon from people, but unlike previous villain teams, they do not have a specific goal other than to cause trouble and acquire enough money to support themselves. In stark contrast to previous villain teams, they do not pose a serious threat to the well-being of Alola and its residents, at least on their own. The majority of whom, the residents, consider Team Skull to just be thuggish nuisances at worst. Team Skull originated from a group that coalesced around one of Alola's kahunas. This group provoked the wrath of the 4 island deities and were struck down. These survivors became the first members of Team Skull. At some point, Team Skull took over Po Town on Ula Ula Island, driving away the original residents, vandalizing the buildings with graffiti and structural damage, along with generally preventing others from entering the town and hindering the flow of electricity. Failed island challenges and an unknown kahuna. Whoever this kahuna could have been was important and would have been aligned originally, likely, with Tapu Bulu of this island. And coincidentally, this would be the same deity that destroyed Tapu Village in defiance of the thrifty Megamart being built, which means that whoever this original kahuna was likely was in favor of the Megamart, someone who would have benefited from its construction, someone who would be aiming to secure more wealth within these lands. And that person may have actually been part of the original Alolan monarchy, but that would be too easy of a connection, I think. And despite Acerola being named as the last living member and orphan of the Alolan monarchy, we hear nothing about her lineage being kahunas. Instead, I want to look at a strange connection that does exist, something that parallels the past, which is Lusamine and Team Skull. She becomes an unofficial sponsor of Team Skull, having them work out tasks for her in secret, likely knowing about their past. After all, they are all teenagers, ones that have nobody left to lead them, people who have left their families and failed the trial. A respected leader of Alola using now a group of people for something nefarious. But then there's an outlier, Plumeria, who even hands us a Poisonium Z, the only Z crystal of its kind that isn't being guarded by a trial captain or kahuna in any capacity. What I'm getting at is the kahuna who betrayed Alola would have likely been related to Plumeria, the big sis of Team Skull, which also makes sense. You have natural guardians of nature and life being opposed by a kahuna of poison. But after all, isn't it strange that while everyone else fails trials and seems to have no home to go to besides Potown, we also get to meet Guzma's parents, yet we see nothing on Plumeria? It seems even more strange that Guzma is clearly stated to have been stealing Beginnium Z crystals, collecting them, putting them away, and never using them as they pile up in his collection. Yet only one Poisonium exists that we are aware of for our second in command, arguably not really second in command. I think she's basically on the same level as Guzma. And as for the number of Poisonium crystals, at least the one we're given is at least the only one other than the one that Plumeria uses. Sure, there are other Z crystals such as Flyinium that we just find secluded away, but that crystal is still used by Kahili, who becomes part of the Elite Four, showing its significance. But there's only one other detail to this that I want to bring up before kind of bringing it all together and summarizing our story, which is Plumeria's ace, Salazzle. Now this lizard, despite not being a dragon type, could be compared to the Mo-o, a powerful shape-shifting lizard spirit of Hawaii that is supposed to be female only and have scales that are black as night, and which would shapeshift into a seductive woman to devour men. They would also appear when fire was lit near or around their dwellings, and yes, outside of the fire type being added in or matching, Salazzle's pheromones not only work on male Salandit, but are also used for perfumes, so we get a lot of things lining up. Yet this role of Mo-o was technically given to the Jangmo-o line, the name of the spirit literally being within the line's names. And so it seems that Pokemon has done what it often does, which is twist real-life lore, just flipping the script a little bit to create something new. And in this world, what would seem like a traditional Mo-o has now become an antagonistic spirit. So, parallels in mind, we have a kahuna who may have been a parent or at least related to Plumeria. This kahuna would have likely held a Salazzle as their own ace or some other poisonous Pokemon. In their actions, they were potentially being employed by the king who wanted to use and abuse nature for wealth. Someone wealthy, like Lusamine, taking advantage of someone else and ne'er-do-wells. This would explain part of the pollution then that was threatening Alola until the Tapus were able to band together to put a stop to it. The kahuna was struck down, so was the monarchy, the team they gathered was destroyed, and a number of those members came together to form Team Skull, including Plumeria, daughter of that kahuna. Now, there's definitely more to the story overall, this War of Alola, the story of the monarchy, but I'm gonna, again, save that for the fun collaboration video, and I hope you're excited for it, even though you have, no real details about it. There's one Pokédex entry in Galar that helps set us on a journey through an era in which the residents of Galar faced a climate harsh enough to wipe out humanity without the assistance of Pokemon. In specific, we have an entry about G-Max Colossal. When Galar was hit by a harsh cold wave, this Pokemon served as a giant heating stove and saved many lives. Now, we still face cold waves in a modern day, some stronger than others, as this past year we were dipping at or lower than -40. Fahrenheit or Celsius, doesn't matter. We're at the point where they match, which is pretty scary, honestly, but we're lucky enough to have technology and means to survive these conditions. People of the past, not so much. And I strongly believe that based on other entries and info we have regarding Galar, we know this was something that may have lasted much longer, because this region puts a strong emphasis on climate change, dramatic climate shifting actually, as evidenced by info from Galarian Corsola and so many other Pokemon that only survive here by being incredibly hardy. This isn't to say that there were years of harsh cold that humans had to deal with. In fact, I would be wrong to even try and figure out a time span of anything greater than, say, 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks every other year, but those 2 weeks would be part of a result of the climate shift. the environment working with new highs and lows as it swings temperature and weather around trying to balance itself. Mudbray is a great example because it was hunted nearly to extinction when it lived all over the world. It was believed for a time to run only wild in Alola. Despite this, Mudbray have been seen roaming in Galar and Paldea, suggesting that its population is slowly recovering from near extinction. In the real world, during times of food scarcity or famine, people will eat what they have to in order to survive. When there's wildly fluctuating weather and extreme cold, it can destroy crops in an instant. All it takes is maybe a good overnight frost and even tomatoes can be gone in that cold snap, thus giving us the famine within the cold front of Galar. Another Pokemon that has deep history within the region is Calyrex, who has two very particular powers that would have been massive for helping populations stay alive until it fought against the Eternamax. Calyrex is known as the King of Bountiful Harvests by the Crown Tundra's inhabitants due to its role in bringing lush vegetation and harvests yearly. Its right hand can cause the land to be covered in verdant grass and blooms, while its left hand allows it to make fields of fruit ripen and become heavy, something that would be incredibly vital before the winter months during the harvest season. We really only know of Calyrex's time in the Crown Tundra, but we also know it landed here after some great trauma, something that has been long accepted by the community through context clues to be Calyrex's involvement in the fight against Eternamax, the full-powered version of Eternatus. It's also something that's made very directly clear within the Pokemon Adventures manga, so that's nice to see a big point clarified like that rather than leaving it vague. Now, a Pokemon like this is vital to a harsh climate, a Pokemon that can literally ignore the terrible conditions of the climate and force agriculture to flourish and bloom even in excess for everybody, so that way they can survive the harsh winter, providing sustenance to people and Pokemon alike within Galar. We also have Eldegoss and Maractus, notorious seed spreaders, who are effectively keystone species of the environments that they reside in. For Eldegoss, the seeds attached to its cotton fluff are full of nutrients. It spreads them on the wind so that plants and other Pokemon can benefit from them. More than this, through Pokemon Snap, we learn it spreads seeds of all kinds, not just its own. Meanwhile, Maractus spreads seeds out once a year that are also nutrient-rich. And then you just wait for Calyrex to snap its fingers, and all of these seeds have now bloomed. So, sure, these Pokemon are vital towards a recovering region or a region trying to stay stable, but they would also be important during this time of famine. Though there is one more Pokemon that has been sticking deep in this brain of mine as a very strange one within Galar, and it's actually Bronzong. This Pokemon was once worshipped in other regions as a deity that would summon rain, a being that would be vital towards providing plentiful harvests. And while we can find it in many places throughout Galar, one place that gives the clearest picture is within the ruins of Route 8, ruins that are being excavated. Bronzong are found through excavation at many different locations, and in Galar, many scientists suspect that this Pokemon originated outside the Galar region, meaning that in times of trade, maybe even in desperation after Calyrex's disappearance, Bronzong was imported into Galar to try and save the people. Unfortunately, some settlements would live to the next era, while others would fall to nothing but these ruins in a time of great famine, potentially even multiple seasons of great famine, a tragedy that buries the history of its people. Lastly, located on the edge of Asado Desert is Cascarafa, the last subject with a tragic past and a lesson harshly learned. This city has not one, but two tributary rivers feeding into its canals. This allows the city to not only be surrounded by water, but to also have a working waterfall and elevators that bring people up to an effective second floor of the city. This seems like a lot of show and glam until we start to dig into something I found very strange. When we look at Asado Desert, we do find more than just a tower that is buried here unlike any other location. We also find ruins. This desert is also the only place where Larvesta naturally spawn, who even in Paldea were still worshipped as an emissary of the sun or a Pokemon that stole the sun. But when we look at the ruins themselves, we have a few different Pokemon spawning here that tell us a story. Ghastly, which are typical of ruins or spirits. Bronzor, which follows the themes of Bronzong that we talked about just now. Stonejourner, who represents Stonehenge, something erected by humanity long ago, Tinka Tuff, who is humanoid and would represent advancements in technology, and lastly, Phalanx, representative of an army. This location wasn't just a random settlement, this was a proper civilization, until something happened. And I can tell you exactly what that something was. Brambling exists within this desert. In fact, it only exists here and in East Province Area 3. But it's when we look at its evolution, Brambleghast, that we find the source of our tragedy. Its dex entry states, on rare occasions, mass outbreaks of these Pokemon will bury an entire town. This seems a bit absurd to think about, but I'll tell you here and now that this happened in the real world. It even happened recently in 2024. A town in southern Utah was taken over by tumbleweeds. Wind blew thousands of weeds into South Jordan. They formed piles as high as 10 feet. People called it Tumblegeddon. Residents used hose and shovels to break down the weed piles before city workers arrived with garbage trucks. I'm not gonna lie to you, I kinda wanna jump into those, but I doubt it would feel good at all. Either way, imagine these tumbleweeds were even more alive, and instead of just spreading seeds in their ball form, they were capturing people and Pokemon to steal their life force away. And unfortunately, this is exactly what happened to the settlement that was once here, leaving future residents to learn a lesson and build canals to not only provide water to their people, but to also prevent such tragedy from ever happening again. But what are your thoughts? Are there any smaller, unheard of tragedies I could have covered? I know one that comes to my mind right off the bat would be the ghost of Unova's Bridge, which I believe is related to Darkrai, but I wanted to stay away from ghost stories in this one, maybe save them for a video in October. But if you did enjoy this, subscribe. There's tons of deep dives to enjoy, and I would recommend that story, Solving Alola's First Faller, as a great follow-up to this one. In addition, thank you to members of the channel that you see on the screen. If you would like your name in the credits, early access to videos, behind-the-scenes info, and members-exclusive videos like one on mushrooms coming out literally this week, become a member for as little as $3 a month. It makes a massive difference as I can dig deeper into research and connections to the real world through Pokemon. Lastly, one of my favorite comments from this past week was a short one from Z Games, who told me in a video that was nearly, or is nearly, a year old that there was a massive bug behind me, which is, it's just funny to me. I just imagine, like, the longer that video stays up and then someone commenting something like that, it's just golden. They also actually made it clear that they were being genuine, warning me about the bug, and were kind enough to say I'm one of their favorite YouTubers, which is very sweet, and I appreciate that. But it's wild to think that, like, I'm in a list of favorites at all, considering I am a much smaller channel than most by comparison. But here I am, still putting out content and doing my best. So thank you for watching and your support, everyone. It does mean the world. But with that, then, as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.